Today is going to be all about how I use my baseball model to bet on baseball. Welcome back to Sports Betting Truth, where it is my goal to give you actual sports betting advice without the touting, shilling, hype, or false promises. Now today's going to be a walkthrough on how I use my baseball model to bet on MLB. Now I'm going to say this right off the bat, this is not a video showing the internals or the guts of my model. That's not what this video is. So before you turn this video off though, I still think there's a lot of value in this video and showing you how I use the outputs of my model to bet on baseball. Let me tell you this, if anybody uploads a video or anything showing you the internals of their model, then chances are that model does not win. Because anyone who has a model that wins isn't going to share it with anybody. And neither am I. I'm not going to show you the internals of my model because I've worked very hard on this for many hours, many days, many months, and I'm not just going to give it away all for free. So I'm going to show you the typical day-by-day process that I use to run my models and get outputs that I can use to make wagers with. So the first thing I do is usually the night before, I'll type in all the matchups and starting pitchers into my Excel file. I do that the night before just so I don't have as much to do the next day. And then I wake up in the morning and I enter in the odds and any pitchers that might have changed. So in the morning what I do is I collect all my stats. It's simply just downloading the stats and copying and pasting them into my Excel files, but it takes about 10 minutes. I will say this right here, all the stats that I use come from Fangraphs. I don't get any stats from anywhere where you have to pay or that are very exclusive. Everything that I use is publicly available. All right, once I've collected all my stats, what I do is I open this file right here called the Baseball Model 4.0 with ATM. Now this file right here generates two of my three models, the ATM and the M1. Now the ATM is still an experimental model I've been working on. It borrows some concepts that I've used to success in college football and college basketball over the years, but I still haven't found a way to quite make it work in baseball yet, but I feel like I'm getting close. So this tab right here is called the stage. It's where all the matchups are and the starting pitchers and the lines. What I do is once I have all my stats gathered, I just hit this button right here and it'll start generating the outputs. The reason I have innings pitched in these columns is just to see if there's any pitchers in there like Logan Webb of the Giants who have a really low sample size of stats this year, and to see if I need to make any adjustments off that. Same with FIP. I will say right now that FIP is one of the inputs of my model. I'm just going to get that out of the way. There's a freebie for you. I also have FIP in there for the same reason, because a lot of pitchers with low sample sizes will have low FIPs, and I have FIPs that are low, colored in red. So if a pitcher with like 7 innings pitch has a red FIP, then I'm going to have to make an adjustment. Without getting into too much detail what ATM and penny and nickel means, ATM is the main part of the ATM model. This is what I go off of. And penny, nickel, dime, quarter, all that is just, those are more of control variables that I use just to try to calibrate the ATM overall. There are various weights of the ATM that I experiment with, but ATM is what I go off of. M factor is a number where the higher it is, the closer the two teams are to the mean in the stats that I use, right? So a lower number means the teams are not very close to the mean. A high number means both teams are very close to the mean. So I click this button and everything kind of outputs right down here. You know, you have the location, away or home, the line, underdog or favorite. And then right here, these are the edges. So what I do is I convert these two numbers into a percentage, and then I subtract the win percentage that it gives from that converted percentage right here to get the edge, right? So if a 115 underdog has a 46.5% chance of winning, but my ATM says the Brewers have a 48.7% chance of winning, there's a 2.2% edge right there. So the other part of this file is the M1 model, and that is calculated in a program called Orange 3 that I use. But what it does is it generates behind the scenes all the inputs for Orange, and then I drop it all into Orange and it gives me an output, which I put right here. So I copy and paste the output right here, and then I copy and paste these numbers right here, and then this calculates. So this is what I use right here. So these are the edges right here, and if it's in gold and bold, then it's a positive edge. If not, it's not a positive edge. And then my third model, if you've watched any of my videos, you know what it is. It's the Monte Carlo. Now, I've already run my Monte Carlo. I'm not going to have it run, but what I do is I just, like the other file, I copy and paste all the stats in there, and then I run it. I do 1,500 simulations per game. You could do more, you could do less, but I do 1,500 because I run it in the morning. If I ran it overnight, I'd probably do 10,000. But since I run it in the morning and it takes about a minute per game when you have 1,500 simulations, if I did 10,000, that would take like 8 minutes per game, and I just don't have that time. So 1500 is still good. You have a margin of error with a 1500 simulation at 2.5%. So it goes through all the games and does a Monte Carlo run, and it gives these win percentages, and from there it calculates the edges. Now with this one, unlike the other two models I use, I subtract the margin of error from the edges just to compensate for the margin of error, which is something you need to do in a Monte Carlo run. And I put that in this column right here. So if the number is still positive even after you subtract the 2.5% margin of error, that means you have a good edge. And all the teams with an edge in those situations are in bold and white right here. Usually I run my Monte Carlo when I'm making breakfast and getting ready in the morning. So it takes about 15 minutes to do an average day where there's 15 games. Okay, and once all three models are done giving me their outputs, I open the edge file, and this is where I copy and paste all my outputs in for analysis. So you have the M1, the ATM, and the Monte Carlo right here. Those are the three columns that are important. Now this file has the last 12 days of data on it, and the reason I did that is not to hide losses or anything, but because the current iteration of the ATM model that I'm using, I started that 12 days ago, so that's what I'm measuring against. So in that 12-day span, my M1 model is up 1.43 units, my ATM model is up 0.36 units, and my Monte Carlo is up 1.12 units. I'm barely breaking even, but it beats losing, and it at least shows that I'm on the right track. But that's not the entire story. That's if you were to play every game that showed an edge. Stay tuned. Since we're on day 13 now, August 17th, I make new columns, and I copy and paste this right here and drop it into the edge file. Do a little format painting. I copy and paste my Monte Carlo odds, and I drop it right here. And then I copy and paste my orange odds, my M1 odds, and I put it right here. And now we're ready to go. So you might think, okay, so you just bet the games that show a positive edge. No, I don't. Here's what I do after that. This is where the value in this video is gonna come. I have a post-production of my model. So if the model outputs themselves out of the production, then what I'm about to show you is the post-production. So I have this tab right here called the report builder. It basically goes through my QM tab and it generates a report based on the criteria I select. So right here I have whenever M1 is greater than 0, and I have it sorted out. So here's what happens when I do that. Okay, so up 1.43 units in these 12 days. So days 1 through 8, I was up 3.68 units, and then I had 2 really bad days in a row, and then I had a really good day, and then I had a bad day. So it's very fluctuated. An ROI of 1.1% off of 133 plays. However, that's if you were to play every game that showed an edge. But what this column over here is it ranks everything from highest edge to lowest edge, and it finds a peak. And according to this, the peak is at number 116 at 0.008 edge. And if I scroll down and find that, it's right here. So if I were to bet everything that had an edge of 0.008 or higher, I would be up 14.07 units with an ROI of 12%. That's what I'm looking for. So I ignore everything down here. Look at that. Only 2 out of the 16 games below that edge have won. So if I just throw those out and just bet everything at 0.08 or higher, 12% ROI, which is really good. So that's what you're looking for. And that's why your model can still be beneficial even if it shows an overall loss, because as long as you have a dynamic like that where if everything above a certain number is profitable, then you're good, right? And ideally, this is an ideal model right here because you want your peak ROI to be at the bottom. You don't want it to be up here because the higher it is, the more exclusive it's going to be and harder to find games to bet on. Now you're probably wondering, well, how come whenever all your edges are really high, they all lose? Good point. I call this dynamic the Vegas knows better than you effect. If your model is that far off from the Vegas line, it's probably not because your model knows something and is just that good. It's probably because the Vegas line knows something that you don't. More often than not, when it's that far off, you're probably going to lose. Not all the time though, but I've noticed that in pretty much all the models I use in all sports, not just baseball, that when it's really this high, that when the differentiation between my line and the Las Vegas line is that high, it's usually not a good sign. So not only can this report builder run off one input, it can also run off 2 inputs or 3 inputs. So say I wanted to run a report when the M1 and the Monte Carlo are on the same page, right? Well, when that happens, it's an ROI of 3.7% and 2.58 units of profit, right? So the ROI of 12.8% here when the two are combined is higher than the ROI of 12% of just the M1 on its own. So what you're doing here is you're looking for synergy between your models. This is why I recommend you run multiple models so you can do this. You can run reports to see what happens when your models are on the same page. So what about when all three of my models are on the same page? ATM, Monte Carlo, and M1 all pointing the same direction with a positive edge. We got an ROI of 7.8%, 4.52 unit of profit overall, but a peak ROI, if you were to play everything with an M1 of 7.5% or higher, you got an ROI of 40%. So it's kind of what you're looking for. And you don't just have to do, you can also do it like this. So say I want to go M1 home teams only, right? So I just put equals home right there. So in just home games, it's an overall 5.01 profit, 7.3 ROI, but a peak ROI of 19.7%. What about away teams? All right, so overall it's a negative result, but there's still a peak of 1.2% in there. You can also do favorites or dogs. So favorites, 1.48 total, 3.52 peak. Dogs, oh, look at that, 19.7, 11, 40. So what if you wanted to do home dogs? Well, home dogs, 1.41, 4.1%, or away favorites. Okay, not that great. So you kind of see the concept right here, right? But it would take too much time to do this every morning, right? And go through that individually manually. So what I do is I have these two tabs, inputs, where I do it automatically right here. So it calculates it all for me. So I just go over here and I hit this button and it does it for me, right? And it puts it all in that table. All right, now that it's done running, we can find what's good. So the highest overall total is ATM home favorites at 9.07 units. The highest overall ROI is 28.2 on Monte Carlo home favorites. The highest peak cum is 1407 on the M1, and the highest peak ROI is 51.5% on the M1 away dogs. Over here you have how many total games make up this sample right here, and right here you have how many total games make up this peak sample right here. So even though you have an ROI of 34.4% for ATM away dogs, only 8 games make up that sample because that's where the peak is. So it's generally not a good idea to play anything below the peak, and here's why. This is the Monte Carlo on its own, and it has a peak at 38 plays of 5.75 units, 14.7% ROI, right? So up to that point you have 4.57 units of profit. But everything below that is negative ROI, see? Because that's why it's a peak. Everything below that is minus 3.45 units. So that's why you only want to play the peak or higher, because anything below the peak is going to be negative ROI every time. That's why it's a peak. So those are the inputs for the 3 models based on home and away and dog and favorite. And here's the combos, right? So this is where I combine the models and find the synergy between the two, and it's the same thing. The highest total cum is M1 and ATM home favorites. The highest total ROI is Monte Carlo ATM home favorites. The highest peak cum is when M1 and ATM are on the same page. And you got some peak ROIs of 100% over here that probably don't count because you only have 1 and 2. So really looking for a good middle ground number, you got this 41.7% at 19, which looks pretty good. And that is M1 Monte Carlo home favorites, right? So now what? You're like, okay, you've calculated all that, but how do you use that to bet? Well, here's what I do. So this is my analysis tab. What it does is for the day of the games I'm using, so day 13, which is today's games, I hit this button and it'll show every team that meets the criteria of one of these peaks right here on the left, right? So if a team has a peak M1 value or higher, it'll show up when I hit this button, and there we go. So the Brewers M1 value meets the peak criteria for M1. So if the M1 peak criteria is 0.0008, as we found earlier, what I do is I go down here and look at the Brewers 5.5%, so that's higher than the 0.008, so they meet the criteria, so that's why they get a number, right? And this number right here is simply a combination of the cum times the ROI. It's what I call the index. The more cum you have, the higher the number is going to be because that's what you want. You don't want to go off a sample size of 1. So the index adjusts for sample size. So it does this for all the games, and it calculates the average ROI of all these peaks, and it puts it right here. So this way I can look at this grid and say, okay, which teams meet the criteria of profitability, okay? So like the Twins and the Rangers over here, the Twins meet all this criteria and the Rangers meet none. So the Twins are probably going to be a good bet according to my 3 models. So to structure this in a bet-friendly way, I have the bet-friendly tab, which is right here. I hit that button and it simply puts all that data from here into here for an easy to read table. If I want to bet flat, it shows me which ones to bet flat on. If I want to bet variable, it shows me which ones to bet variable on and how much to bet. And that way I can use this grid to quickly find which games to bet in the morning and not spend a lot of time on it. So since I am a volume bettor, these are all the games it's telling me to bet on. So now I know which games to bet on. I put my bets in, and I'm not quite done yet. bet. So I opened my in-game MLB dashboard. I've done a video on this before to show you how it works. The in-game MLB dashboard is how I keep track of my bets during the day to see how they're doing. And what I'll do is I'll drop this right here because this is what I use to bet with right here. But I also like to track each individual model as well, which is what this is right here. So all I do is click this button and it'll start filling in the results of the day, and it calculates a live hold. My model said to bet on the Pirates, I did, they lost, right? My model said to bet on the Indians, I did, they lost. My model said to bet on the Mariners, I did, they won. And my model said to bet on the Astros, are currently losing in the 5th. So what the live hold is it takes this live win percentage right here, and it multiplies it times the money line to see where the bet currently stands. So if I bet on the Astros at minus 138, but they only have a 22.7% chance of winning now, that means if I bet 72.86, I currently have a live hold of minus 44.33. That number is the percentage chance of the Astros winning times the percent chance of the Astros losing, and how much I would win if the Astros win and how much I'd lose if the Astros lose. That's what that number is. It's a synthesis of all those things. These bold numbers up here are where I currently stand for games that have completed. So I'm down 0.52 units in the blender and the ATM, but I'm up 0.48 units in the Monte Carlo. I'm up $2 in the games I've actually bet on. But according to the live hold, which is a sum of the games still in progress, adding this to the mix, I'm down $42. And I'm down 1.13 units on the blender and ATM and down 0.13 units on the Monte Carlo, the live hold. And the live hold fluctuates because this live win percentage fluctuates. Okay, so the A's just scored 3 runs in the bottom of the 7th, right? So that took the Astros win percentage from 22% to 1.8%. So that's pretty much a loss now, right? So whenever that happens, I call that the red line. Whenever I feel like a team really has no chance of coming back, you red line them. Minus 70.57 is pretty close to the 72.86 I would lose if the Astros were not to come back and win. So that's pretty much a sure thing. But I have seen some pretty crazy flips. The other night, the Phillies came back against the Cubs from like 5 runs down. So I use this to track my bets throughout the day. All right, we're now underway in St. Louis. Top the first one out. So I got some conflicting bets right here, which is why I have no bet on the game, because whenever there's conflict, I don't bet. And we got conflict because the blender says one thing, the Monte Carlo and the ATM says the other. The Tigers and Rays, there's conflict, but I also measure the conflict over here. That's what the score is. It shows how much conflict there is. As long as the score is 3 or 4, I'll bet on a team. But if it's right here, 3 and 2, I won't. So because it's 0-0 in the middle of the third, the Tigers have a 29.8% chance of winning, which is slightly higher than their money line odds, which is why the ATM that bet on the Tigers currently shows a minor profit. So my live hold right now, all red, but let's hope things can change. But that's baseball for you. That is betting on baseball. You're going to go through swings. Remember how I showed you this earlier? We got the report builder for my M1, aka blender model. So through 8 days, I was up 3.68 units, right? And then on day 10, all that profit was wiped out, and all of a sudden I was down 3.74 units, just like that. One bad night, all my profit to date, plus double that, gone. But then day 11, it all came back, 7.57 unit profit night, and I'm back up 3.83 units. And then last night, minus 2.4 units, I'm back down to 1.43. So it's very cyclical. You can't get stuck on one bad day or one bad week. It's the long run here. But overall, that's how I bet on baseball using my model. It's a process, but it's something I'm refining. I've pretty much got it down to a science where I can do all of that right there in about 20 to 30 minutes. And that's something you're going to have to do if you want to have a good model. It's not just about making a good model. It's also about making a model that you can analyze in the post and make a model of your model to determine what to bet with. Anyway, that wraps it up today for Sports Betting Truth. Until next time, this is Sports Betting Truth signing off.